The USS Scorpius sliced through the dark waters of the North Atlantic like a phantom, its nuclear-powered engines humming with a rhythm that had become as familiar to the crew as their own heartbeats. Commander Robert Hayes stood in the control room, his weathered hands gripping the periscope handles as he surveyed the empty horizon through the lens. It was March 15, 1984, and the Scorpius was 3 weeks into what should have been a routine surveillance mission along the edge of Soviet territorial waters. The submarine was a Los Angeles-class attack sub, one of the Navy's finest, equipped with the most advanced sonar systems available and crewed by 129 of the most capable sailors in the fleet. Among them was Lieutenant Sarah Chen, the navigation officer, whose precision had earned her a reputation as the best in the Atlantic Fleet. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Williams manned the sonar station, his trained ears capable of distinguishing a whale's song from the distant rumble of a Soviet destroyer at ranges that seemed almost supernatural. And then there was Ensign David Kowalski, fresh from the Naval Academy, wide-eyed and eager, still adjusting to the claustrophobic reality of life beneath the waves. The mission had been unremarkable until that Tuesday afternoon. They were operating at a depth of 400 feet, maintaining radio silence as protocol demanded, when Williams noticed something odd on his display. At first, he thought it was a malfunction. The sonar was picking up what appeared to be a massive acoustic anomaly directly ahead, a wall of distorted sound that seemed to pulse with an irregular rhythm. "Commander, I'm getting something strange on the passive array," Williams reported, his brow furrowed as he adjusted the gain on his equipment. "It's like interference, but I've never seen a pattern like this before." Hayes moved to stand behind the sonar station, studying the waterfall display with growing concern. The acoustic signature wasn't natural. It couldn't be. But it wasn't mechanical either. It was something else entirely, something that defied his 30 years of naval experience. "What's our distance to the anomaly?" Hayes asked. "Approximately 2 miles in closing, sir. We're drifting right into it." Lieutenant Chen looked up from her charts, a crease forming between her eyebrows. "Commander, according to my calculations, we should be in completely open water. There's nothing on any chart that would explain this reading." Hayes made a decision. "All stop. Helm, maintain present depth and heading. Let's see what we're dealing with before we go any further." The order was executed immediately, and the Scorpius glided to a halt, suspended in the cold Atlantic waters. For several minutes, the control room was silent except for the ambient sounds of the submarine, the soft whir of ventilation, the occasional ping of the hull adjusting to pressure, the quiet murmur of electronic systems. Then the lights flickered. It was brief, barely noticeable, but in the confined space of a submarine, every irregularity carried weight. The crew exchanged glances. Hayes reached for the intercom to contact the engineering section when it happened again, this time lasting longer. 3 seconds of darkness before the emergency lighting kicked in, bathing the control room in an eerie red glow. "Engineering, this is the con. Report status." Hayes barked into the handset. The response came crackling back, distorted by static that shouldn't have been possible on an internal communications system. "Con, engineering. We're showing normal power levels across the board, but we've got some kind of electromagnetic interference. It's playing havoc with our instrumentation." Williams suddenly gripped the sides of his console, his face pale. "Commander, the anomaly. It's moving. It's surrounding us." On the sonar display, the acoustic wall had transformed into something that resembled a sphere, and the Scorpius was at its center. The pressure gauges began to fluctuate wildly, showing readings that oscillated between their current depth and what appeared to be impossible pressures that would have crushed the hull like a tin can. "This doesn't make any sense," Chen muttered, frantically checking and rechecking her instruments. "The gyroscope is spinning. We're showing movement, but we haven't changed course or speed." Hayes felt the deck shift beneath his feet. Not the normal roll of a submarine adjusting trim, but something different. Something that made his inner ear scream that the world had tilted in a direction that shouldn't exist. Around him, crew members grabbed for handholds as a sensation of vertigo washed through the vessel. "Blow ballast! Emergency surface!" Hayes shouted, but even as the order left his lips, he knew something was fundamentally wrong. The sensation intensified, a feeling of being pulled in multiple directions simultaneously, as if the submarine was being stretched and compressed at the same time. The lights went out completely. In the darkness, Hayes heard the sounds of his crew, confused shouts, the clatter of equipment, someone retching as the vertigo overwhelmed them. He reached out blindly, trying to find purchase, trying to maintain some sense of orientation, but it felt like the submarine was spinning, falling, rising all at once. Then came the light. It wasn't the red emergency lighting or the white glow of their normal illumination. This light was blue-white and impossibly bright, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere, penetrating the hull as if the steel and titanium were transparent. Hayes squeezed his eyes shut against the glare, but it made no difference. The light was inside his eyelids, inside his mind. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, everything stopped. The normal lighting returned. The deck was level. The instruments showed standard readings. Hayes opened his eyes, his heart hammering in his chest, and looked around the control room. His crew was picking themselves up, checking equipment, looking as shaken as he felt. "Damage report," Hayes said, his voice hoarse. "All stations check in." One by one, the responses came back. Somehow, impossibly, there was no damage. Every system was functioning normally. The reactor was stable. Hull integrity was intact. It was as if nothing had happened. Except Williams was staring at his sonar display with an expression of complete bewilderment. "Commander," he said slowly, "the anomaly is gone. We're reading completely normal acoustic conditions." Chen was equally confused, her eyes fixed on her navigation console. "Sir, I'm getting a GPS signal." "GPS?" Hayes repeated. GPS satellites were still experimental in 1984, not yet fully operational for widespread naval use, and certainly not reliable enough for precise navigation at their depth. "Yes, sir. And according to this signal?" Chen's voice trailed off as she recalculated, her fingers flying over the keys. "Commander, according to GPS, we're in exactly the same position we were before the incident, but the timestamp on the signal says we've moved 2 hours and 17 minutes into the future." "That's impossible," Hayes said flatly. "Check your equipment." "I've checked it 3 times, sir, but there's something else. The GPS constellation, it's showing satellites that shouldn't exist. The system reads as fully operational, but that's not scheduled to happen for several more years." A chill ran down Hayes' spine. "Communications attempt to raise sublint on standard frequencies. Let's figure out what just happened." The communications officer worked his station, cycling through the designated frequencies for submarine communications with the Atlantic Submarine Command. After several minutes of trying, he looked up with frustration. "Sir, I'm not getting any response on any of our standard channels, but I am picking up multiple encrypted transmissions on frequencies we don't have in our database. The encryption protocols are completely unfamiliar." Hayes felt the weight of command settling heavily on his shoulders. Whatever had happened, they were in uncharted territory now, literally and figuratively. He needed to make decisions based on incomplete information, something every commander dreaded. "Take us to periscope depth," he ordered. "Slowly. Let's see what's up there." The Scorpius rose through the water column, ascending toward the surface with cautious deliberation. As they approached periscope depth, Hayes positioned himself at the scope, ready to scan the horizon. The periscope broke the surface and he began his sweep. What he saw made his blood run cold. The ocean was the same, the familiar gray-green waters of the North Atlantic under an overcast sky. But cutting through those waters, approximately 3 miles to the northeast, was a surface vessel unlike anything Hayes had ever seen. It was massive, easily the size of a carrier, but its design was alien, angular and stealthy, with surfaces that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The ship's superstructure was minimal, dotted with what appeared to be advanced radar and communications arrays that looked like something from a science fiction film. "Unknown surface contact bearing 035, range approximately 3 miles, Hayes announced, his voice tight. "Taking photos." The periscope camera clicked rapidly, capturing images of the strange vessel. As Hayes watched, the ship altered course, turning directly toward the Scorpius's position. It shouldn't have been possible. They were running silent, and the periscope created only the smallest signature on the surface. But somehow, the vessel had detected them. "Con, sonar. We're being actively pinged by the surface contact. They've got us locked. Down scope. Take her down to 600 feet, all ahead full. Execute evasive pattern Delta 7. The Scorpius dove, her screws biting into the water as she accelerated away from the surface contact. But the pinging followed them, and Hayes could hear the active sonar pulses reverberating through the hull. Sharp, regular, and far more powerful than anything he knew the Soviets possessed. For 20 minutes they ran, changing course and depth in random patterns designed to break any tracking solution. Finally, the pinging ceased, and they were alone again in the dark waters. Hayes called his senior officers to the wardroom for an emergency conference. Around the small table, the faces of his department heads reflected the same confusion and concern he felt. He laid out what they knew: the anomaly, the temporal displacement suggested by the GPS readings, the impossible surface vessel, the advanced communications they'd intercepted. "Gentlemen, and Lieutenant Chen," Hayes began, "I need theories. What the hell just happened to us?" Lieutenant Commander James Pearson, the executive officer, spoke first. "Sir, the most rational explanation is that we experienced some kind of equipment malfunction. The anomaly could have been a natural phenomenon: seismic activity, undersea volcanic vents, unusual salinity gradients creating acoustic mirages. The GPS readings could be corrupted data, and that surface vessel could be a prototype we weren't briefed about." It was a reasonable assessment, the kind of logical analysis that Pearson was known for, but it didn't account for everything they'd experienced. Chen shook her head. "With respect, XO, that doesn't explain the constellation of GPS satellites. I didn't just see readings for satellites that don't exist. I verified their positions, their orbital parameters. The entire system is operational in a way that won't be possible for years according to every specification I've studied." "Maybe we weren't briefed on the full deployment schedule," Pearson countered. "Maybe," Chen conceded. "But what about the communications protocols? The encryption standards? Our crypto gear can't even recognize the format, which suggests algorithms that haven't been developed yet." Williams, who had been quietly listening, leaned forward. "Commander, there's something else. When I was reviewing the recordings from the sonar during the incident, I found something. Just before everything went crazy, the anomaly was emitting a sound, very low frequency, almost below our detection threshold. I cleaned it up and analyzed the pattern." He produced a printout covered in oscillating waveforms. "It's regular, too regular to be natural. This is artificial, sir. Something created that anomaly, and whatever it was powerful enough to affect every system on this boat simultaneously." The wardroom fell silent as the implications sank in. If Williams was right, then they hadn't just encountered a natural phenomenon. They had encountered something designed, something with capabilities far beyond current technology. Hayes made his decision. "We proceed under the assumption that something extraordinary has occurred. Until we can establish contact with Sublint and verify our situation, we maintain operational security and stay submerged. Chen, I want you to continue monitoring GPS and any other positioning data you can access. Williams, keep a close ear on all acoustic activity. Pearson, work with engineering to make absolutely certain every system on this boat is functioning correctly. And if we can't raise Sublint," Pearson asked, "then we surface, make for the nearest friendly port, and figure this out on the surface. But not until we're certain we're not sailing into a Soviet trap or some kind of classified operation we've stumbled into." The meeting adjourned, and Hayes returned to his cabin, his mind racing. He sat at his small desk and pulled out the sealed orders that had been given to him before departure. Standard protocol for all submarine commanders, containing instructions for various contingencies. He broke the seal and read through them, looking for anything that might apply to their situation. There was nothing. No mention of experimental technology, no warnings about unusual phenomena in their patrol area, no instructions for handling temporal anomalies because such things were the domain of science fiction, not naval operations. Hayes pulled out his personal log and began to write, documenting everything that had happened with as much detail as he could manage. Whatever had occurred, whatever they had experienced, it needed to be recorded. The Navy would need to know, and if something happened to the Scorpius, at least there would be some account of their final hours. Over the next 48 hours, the Scorpius cruised through the Atlantic at depth, her crew maintaining their stations while trying to make sense of their situation. Chen continued to receive GPS signals that indicated they were exactly where they should be, geographically but displaced in time. The communications officer intercepted dozens of transmissions, all encrypted with unfamiliar protocols, all suggesting a level of technological sophistication that exceeded anything in the 1984 arsenal. And then, on the third day after the incident, they received a transmission that changed everything. It came on an emergency frequency, broadcast in the clear, using standard naval communications protocols. But the message itself was impossible. USS Scorpius, this is United States Atlantic Fleet Command. Authentication code follows: Sierra Whiskey 79er Delta 4. Scorpius, you are ordered to surface immediately and maintain position at coordinates provided. A recovery operation is en route. Acknowledge receipt of this transmission. Hayes listened to the message play 3 times before he allowed himself to believe what he was hearing. The authentication code was correct. It matched the classified codes that only he and Pearson had access to, codes that were changed monthly and known only to a handful of people in the Atlantic Fleet command structure. But the voice on the transmission, the cadence of the speech, the terminology used, it all suggested that the message had originated from a communications center that was far more sophisticated than anything Sublint operated in 1984. Should we respond? Pearson asked. Hayes considered the question. If they responded, they would be confirming their position and making themselves vulnerable. But if they didn't, they would be violating a direct order from what appeared to be legitimate command authority. Prepare a response, single burst transmission, acknowledge receipt and request confirmation of current date and operational status. If they're really Sublint, they'll understand why we're asking. The communications officer composed the message and transmitted it in a compressed burst that lasted less than a second. The response came back almost immediately. Scorpius confirmation. Current date is March 17, 2023. You have been missing for 39 years. Repeat. You have been missing for 39 years. Surface and maintain position. Medical and technical teams are standing by. Welcome back. In the control room of the USS Scorpius, time seemed to stop. The crew members who heard the transmission stood frozen, their minds struggling to process what they had just been told. 39 years. They had lost 39 years in what felt like 2 hours. Hayes felt the deck shift beneath him again, but this time it wasn't a physical sensation. It was the weight of understanding that the world they had known was gone, that everyone they had left behind had aged nearly 4 decades, while they had experienced only minutes of strangeness in the dark waters of the Atlantic. Commander? Pearson's voice was barely a whisper. What do we do? Hayes looked around at his crew, at the young faces that had not aged a day since they'd left port in February 1984, at the submarine that still bore the marks and equipment of an era that had ended decades ago. He thought of his wife, his children, his parents, all of them now 39 years older if they were even still alive. We surface, Hayes said finally, and we find out what kind of world we've come back to. The USS Scorpius began her ascent toward a future she had never been meant to see. The morning sun of March 17, 2023, broke through scattered clouds as the USS Scorpius broached the surface of the Atlantic Ocean like a leviathan emerging from legend. Salt water cascaded down her tower as she stabilized on the surface, her hull gleaming with the peculiar sheen of a vessel that had been sealed underwater for what its crew perceived as mere days, but the world knew as decades. Commander Hayes climbed through the hatch and onto the bridge, blinking against the brightness of natural light after days submerged. The air tasted different, cleaner somehow, despite the salt spray. Or perhaps it was his imagination, his mind already trying to reconcile the impossible situation they found themselves in. Behind him, Lieutenant Chen and Chief Williams followed, their faces pale with apprehension. On the horizon, Hayes could see them coming. Not one vessel but an entire task force. Through his binoculars he counted at least 6 ships, all bearing the unmistakable silhouette of United States Navy vessels, though their designs were sleek and angular in ways that made them look more like sculptures than warships. Leading the formation was what appeared to be a guided missile destroyer, its hull number reading DDG-114, though Hayes didn't recognize the class. They're real, Chen said softly beside him. This is really happening. Stay focused, Lieutenant, Hayes replied, though his own voice carried an edge of unreality. We're still on duty, and these people are still our command authority, regardless of what year it is. The destroyer, which Hayes would later learn was the USS Ralph Johnson, an Arleigh Burke-class ship that hadn't even been designed when the Scorpius had disappeared, approached with practiced precision. Hayes could see figures moving on her deck, and as she drew within half a mile, a voice crackled over the radio. USS Scorpius, this is Commander Patricia Knowles, commanding officer of USS Ralph Johnson. I'm sure you have 1,000 questions, but first let me say, it's good to see you, Scorpius. A lot of people thought you were lost forever. Hayes picked up the radio handset. USS Ralph Johnson, this is Commander Robert Hayes, commanding officer Scorpius. We're not entirely sure what happened to us, Commander. Our crew is shaken but intact. All personnel accounted for, no casualties. There was a pause on the other end, and Hayes imagined he could hear emotion in the brief silence. Understood, Commander Hayes. We have medical personnel, psychiatrists, and a technical team ready to board and assist. We're also going to escort you to Naval Station Norfolk. where a full debriefing awaits. For now, just know that you're safe and you're home. Home. The word echoed in Hayes's mind. But was it still home if everything familiar had changed? Over the next hour, a team from the Ralph Johnson came aboard the Scorpius via rigid-hull inflatable boats. Hayes watched as they approached, noting their uniforms, similar to what he knew but with subtle differences in cut and insignia. The equipment they carried looked simultaneously familiar and alien, compact devices that he suspected held more computing power than the Scorpius's entire electronics suite. The team leader was a Navy psychiatrist, Commander Dr. Lisa Reynolds, a woman in her early 40s with kind eyes and a gentle demeanor that immediately put Hayes somewhat at ease. She saluted as she stepped aboard, a gesture of normalcy in a profoundly abnormal situation. "Commander Hayes," she said, "I can't imagine what you and your crew are going through. We're here to help in any way we can. Before we do anything else, I need to know, is everyone physically okay? Anyone injured during the incident?" "No injuries," Hayes confirmed. "Confusion, fear, disorientation, plenty of that. But physically, we're all intact." Reynolds nodded. "That's good. Commander, over the next few days, we're going to need to conduct extensive medical examinations, psychological evaluations, and technical assessments of your vessel. The scientific community is, well, they're going to be very interested in what happened to you. But we're going to take this at a pace that works for your crew. This isn't an interrogation, it's a recovery operation." As the Scorpius got underway, escorted by the modern task force, Hayes gathered his crew in the mess hall. Looking at their faces, young faces, faces that should have shown the wear of decades but instead showed only the strain of the past 72 hours, he felt the weight of leadership in a way he never had before. "By now you've all heard the situation," Hayes began. "According to the United States Navy, according to the ship surrounding us, it's March 17, 2023. For reasons we don't yet understand, we experienced a temporal displacement. We've lost 39 years. The silence in the mess hall was absolute. Some crew members stared at their hands, others at the bulkhead, a few had tears streaming down their faces. "I know what you're thinking," Hayes continued. "You're thinking about your families, your friends, everyone you left behind. I'm thinking about them too. My wife Sarah, my kids Tommy and Jennifer. They would be in their 50s now. My parents." He paused, composing himself. "I don't know if they're still alive." Ensign Kowalski raised his hand, his voice cracking. "Commander, my girlfriend Melissa. We were going to get married when I got back from this deployment. She was 22. Now she'd be 61. She probably thinks I'm dead. She probably moved on, got married, had a whole life without me. Maybe," Hayes acknowledged. "And maybe she's been waiting, hoping, all this time. We don't know yet. What I do know is that we're going to face this together, as a crew. The Navy is going to help us navigate this transition, and we're going to help each other. We survived something impossible. Now we need to survive the aftermath." Chief Williams stood up. "Permission to speak freely, sir?" "Granted, Chief. With all due respect to the commander's optimism, we're freaks now. We're ghosts who came back. The people we knew are gone or old or dead. The world has moved on without us. The Navy might help us, but they're going to treat us like experiments, like curiosities. And honestly, sir, I'm not sure I want to live in a world where everyone I loved is gone." The raw pain in Williams's voice echoed what Hayes suspected many of the crew felt. Before he could respond, Lieutenant Chen spoke up. "Chief, you're right that this is going to be hard. Probably the hardest thing any of us will ever face. But we're not alone, and we're not the first people to lose time. Think about prisoners of war, people in comas, anyone who's been cut off from the world for years. They found ways to adapt, to reconnect. We can too. But we're not just cut off from the world for years," Williams countered. "We're cut off from time itself. This isn't just culture shock, it's existential displacement." Hayes held up a hand. "Both of you are right. This is unprecedented, and it's going to be devastating in ways we can't even comprehend yet. But Chief, I'm not going to accept that we can't find a way forward. We're submariners. We're trained to operate in the most hostile environment on Earth, to maintain discipline and composure when everything around us is trying to kill us. We're going to apply that same mindset to this situation." The conversation continued for another hour, with crew members voicing fears, asking questions that Hayes couldn't answer, seeking reassurance that he wasn't sure he could provide. But by the end, there was a sense of tentative solidarity, a recognition that they were all in this together. 3 days later, the USS Scorpius entered Norfolk Naval Station, and Hayes got his first real look at the world of 2023. The base was both familiar and foreign. The same general layout, the same geographic features, but everything else had changed. The ships in port were sleek and modern, bristling with technology. The buildings were new, or at least renovated beyond recognition. And everywhere, people walked around with small rectangular devices, constantly looking at screens, communicating with invisible others. As the Scorpius was secured to a pier that had been cleared and isolated for their arrival, Hayes noticed something else. Cameras. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, positioned around the dock, recording everything. News helicopters circled overhead, their rotors creating a constant whoomp, whoomp, whoomp that reminded him of combat footage from Vietnam. Dr. Reynolds appeared at his side. "I should warn you, Commander. Your story has become international news. The world knows that the Scorpius disappeared in 1984 and just reappeared. Everyone wants to know how, why, what happened. You and your crew are about to become the most famous people on the planet. That's the last thing we need," Hayes muttered. "I know. We're going to do our best to protect your privacy, at least until you've had time to adjust. But eventually, you're going to have to face the public, answer questions, tell your story." The debriefing process began immediately. Hayes and his senior officers were taken to a conference room in the base headquarters, where they faced a panel of admirals, scientists, intelligence officers, and government officials. For 8 hours straight, they recounted everything that had happened: the anomaly, the temporal displacement, the emergence into 2023. The scientists were particularly interested in the physical details: the light, the sensation of displacement, the readings from their instruments during the incident. One of them, Dr. Rachel Foster from MIT, presented a theory involving quantum entanglement and localized space-time distortions that went completely over Hayes's head, involving terms like Kerr black holes, closed time-like curves, and exotic matter. The short version, Dr. Foster explained when she saw Hayes's confusion, is that you may have encountered a naturally occurring, or possibly artificially created wormhole or temporal rift. These are theoretical constructs that we believe are possible based on general relativity, but we've never observed one. If your account is accurate, the Scorpius may have passed through such a phenomenon, skipping forward in time while experiencing only a brief subjective duration. "Is it possible to go back?" Hayes asked quietly. The room fell silent. Dr. Foster's expression softened. "Commander, I understand why you'd ask that, but honestly, we don't know. We don't understand what happened well enough to replicate it, and even if we did, the energy requirements for creating such a phenomenon would be astronomical. The Scorpius didn't cause this. You were caught in something that already existed. Finding it again, let alone reversing the effect. I'm sorry, but I wouldn't hold out hope." Hayes nodded slowly, feeling something precious die inside him. The faint fantasy that maybe somehow they could return to 1984, to their lives, to their loved ones as they remembered them. It evaporated in the face of Dr. Foster's gentle honesty. The debriefing concluded with a Navy psychiatrist, Captain Dr. James Morrison, outlining the plan for the crew's integration into 2023. "We're going to take this slowly," he said. "For the next month, you'll remain on base in dedicated housing. We'll provide orientation sessions to help you understand the modern world. Technology, culture, politics, everything that's changed. We'll also work individually with each crew member to locate family members and, when appropriate, facilitate reunions." "When appropriate," Hayes echoed. "Commander, some of your crew members' families may not want contact. Some people moved on, remarried, built new lives. For them, seeing a husband or father who hasn't aged could be traumatic. We need to approach these reunions carefully, with the input of trained counselors." The reality of that statement hit Hayes like a physical blow. Not everyone would want to see them. Not everyone would welcome them back. They were, as Chief Williams had said, ghosts. That night, alone in the temporary quarters assigned to him, a small but comfortable room with amenities that seemed impossibly advanced to his 1984 sensibilities, Hayes was given a tablet computer and shown how to access the internet. For hours, he searched, reading about the world he'd missed. The Cold War had ended. The Soviet Union had collapsed. The World Trade Center towers he'd known had been destroyed in a terrorist attack and replaced with new structures. A black man had been elected president. Same-sex marriage was legal. Humanity had rovers on Mars and satellites at the edge of the solar system. And then he searched for his family. He found his son's obituary first. Thomas Hayes, dead of cancer in 2019 at the age of 53. Never married, no children. The obituary mentioned that Thomas had spent his life working as a marine biologist, inspired by his father's love of the ocean, always hoping that one day the mystery of the Scorpius's disappearance would be solved. Hayes had to set the tablet down, his hands shaking, tears streaming down his face. His son had lived his entire adult life without a father, had died believing Hayes was gone forever, and Hayes hadn't been there. Not for Tommy's graduation, his career, his illness, his death. 35 years of his son's life gone, inaccessible. His daughter Jennifer was alive. She was 57 years old, married with 3 children of her own, living in Oregon. Her social media profile showed a woman who looked like an older version of his wife Sarah, with the same gentle smile, the same warm eyes. But she was a stranger, shaped by experiences Hayes hadn't shared, a lifetime he hadn't been part of. And Sarah, his wife. He searched for her name with trembling fingers and found her alive, 82 years old, living in a retirement community in Florida. There were photos, a woman with white hair, and a face marked by decades of living, but unmistakably Sarah. Her profile mentioned that she had never remarried, that she'd dedicated her life to advocating for the families of missing service members, that she'd never given up hope that the Scorpius would be found. Hayes closed the tablet and sat in the darkness of his quarters, feeling the full weight of temporal displacement crushing down on him. He was 52 years old, but everyone from his time was in their 80s and 90s, if they were alive at all. His children were older than he was. The woman he'd kissed goodbye in February 1984, promising to return in 6 weeks, was now elderly, having lived an entire lifetime in his absence. How could they possibly bridge that gap? How could he look his wife in the eyes and reconcile the young woman he'd left with the elderly woman she'd become? How could he be a father to children who were now middle-aged or dead, who had grown up without him, who had grieved and moved on? A knock at his door interrupted his spiral of despair. It was Dr. Reynolds. "I figured you might be doing research," she said gently. "I wanted to check on you." This is usually the hardest night, when the reality fully sinks in. "My son is dead," Hayes said flatly. "My daughter is 57 years old. My wife is 82. How do I process that, doctor? How do I come back from that?" Reynolds sat down across from him. "Commander, I'm not going to pretend this isn't devastating. What you're experiencing is a form of grief that most people never face. Grief for a life that continued without you, for time you can never get back. But I want you to consider something. Your wife never gave up on you. For 39 years she held on to hope. That says something profound about her love for you. And now she's going to see that I haven't aged while she's become elderly. How is that fair to her? How is that anything other than cruel?" "Maybe it is cruel," Reynolds admitted. "But maybe it's also a gift. Maybe getting you back, even changed by time, is something she's been praying for every day since you vanished. You won't know until you talk to her." Hayes shook his head. "I don't know if I can do this." "You can. You're a submarine commander. You've made life and death decisions under pressure. This is just another kind of pressure, another kind of crisis. You navigate it one day at a time, one decision at a time." Over the following weeks, the crew of the Scorpius underwent intensive orientation. They learned about smartphones and social media, streaming services and electric cars, GPS and Wi-Fi, and all the technological marvels that had become mundane in their absence. They learned about the social changes, marriage equality, the Me Too movement, Black Lives Matter, climate change activism. They learned about the political landscape, the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, the rise of China, the election of Donald Trump and then Joe Biden. Some adapted better than others. Ensign Kowalski, the youngest of the crew at 24 years old in 1984, found that he could more easily relate to the 20-somethings of 2023, even though there were still significant cultural gaps. He discovered that his former girlfriend, Melissa, had indeed married someone else and had a family, but she agreed to meet with him, to provide closure for both of them. Chief Williams struggled more. His parents were dead, his siblings elderly and distant. The world of 2023 felt alien to him. Too fast, too connected, too different from the working-class Baltimore neighborhood he'd grown up in. He spent most of his free time in the company of other Scorpius crew members, finding comfort in the only people who truly understood what he was experiencing. Lieutenant Chen threw herself into learning about the advances in navigation and satellite technology. She discovered that the systems she'd once considered cutting-edge were now museum pieces, that modern navigation was automated and precise in ways that would have seemed like magic in 1984. Rather than being discouraged, she was fascinated, eager to study and understand how her field had evolved. And Hayes prepared himself to meet his wife. The Navy arranged it carefully, with counselors present and privacy ensured. The meeting was scheduled for a sunny afternoon in April, at a neutral location, a private room in a hotel near the base. Hayes wore his dress uniform, medals earned in a different era pinned to his chest, looking every inch the submarine commander from 1984. When Sarah was wheeled into the room, she used a wheelchair now, her mobility limited by age. Hayes felt his heart stop. She was elderly, yes, her hair white, and her face lined with decades of life. But her eyes were the same, that deep brown he'd fallen in love with, and when she saw him, those eyes filled with tears. "Robert," she whispered, and in that single word, he heard everything. The grief, the love, the anger, the hope. He crossed the room and knelt beside her wheelchair, taking her hands in his. They were thin now, marked with age spots, but they were still her hands. "Sarah, I'm so sorry I left you." "You didn't leave me," she said firmly, her voice wavering but strong. "You were taken from me. For 39 years I've wondered what happened, if you were dead, if you were suffering, and now you're here, and you look exactly like the man who kissed me goodbye in 1984, and I don't know whether to laugh or cry or be angry." "Be angry," Hayes said. "God knows I am. Angry at whatever force in the universe took me from you, from our children, from our life together. Angry that I missed Tommy's entire life. Angry that I can't get those years back." Sarah reached up with a trembling hand and touched his face, her fingers tracing the contours that were unchanged from her youth. "You're still so young," she said wonderingly. "And I'm so old. How can we possibly—" "I don't know," Hayes interrupted. "I don't know how we bridge this gap, how we reconcile who we were with who we are now. But Sarah, I never stopped loving you. Not for 1 second in my subjective time. And I'm here now. I'm real. I'm back." Sarah began to cry then, truly cry, and Hayes held her, feeling the fragility of her body, so different from the young woman he remembered. But underneath the physical changes, she was still Sarah, still the woman he'd married, still the love of his life. "Jennifer wants to see you," Sarah said when she'd composed herself. "She's coming tomorrow. And Robert, she has children. You have grandchildren. Grandchildren who are older than you are now." The absurdity of that statement might have been funny under different circumstances. Instead, it was just another layer of impossible reality to accept. They talked for hours, Sarah filling him in on the life she'd lived, the grief of losing him, the struggle of raising 2 children alone, the advocacy work she'd done, the small joys and large sorrows of 39 years. Hayes told her about the Scorpius, the anomaly, the 2 hours that had felt like 2 hours but had stolen nearly 4 decades. When the meeting ended, they made plans to see each other again soon. Hayes returned to his quarters feeling emotionally wrung out, but also, for the first time since the displacement, feeling a glimmer of hope. The road ahead would be impossibly difficult, the adjustments painful, the losses irreplaceable, but he still had Sarah. She had waited for him against all odds, and now they had a chance, however strange, however complicated, to have some kind of future together. The next day, Hayes met his daughter Jennifer. She was a stranger with his wife's eyes and his own stubbornness, and their meeting was awkward and painful and eventually tearful as they tried to navigate the impossible dynamic of a father younger than his daughter. But they talked, and they agreed to keep trying, to build some kind of relationship despite the temporal distance between them. Over the following months, the crew of the Scorpius slowly integrated into 2023. The Navy offered them all medical retirement with full benefits, recognizing that asking them to serve in a military so different from the one they'd known would be unrealistic. Some accepted immediately. Others, like Hayes, struggled with the idea of leaving behind the only career they'd ever known. The Scorpius herself became the subject of intense scientific study. Researchers examined every inch of the submarine, looking for evidence of the temporal displacement, traces of exotic particles or anomalous radiation that might explain what had happened. They found subtle changes in the metal of the hull, quantum-level alterations that suggested exposure to extreme gravitational and temporal forces, but nothing conclusive enough to fully explain the phenomenon. and the Navy, along with NOAA and various scientific organizations, began searching for the anomaly, hoping to find and study the location where the Scorpius had vanished. But the Atlantic Ocean kept her secrets, and despite months of searching with the most advanced detection equipment available in 2023, nothing was found. The crew members dispersed gradually. Some stayed near Norfolk, finding comfort in proximity to others who understood. Others scattered across the country, seeking to start new lives far from the constant reminders of what they'd lost. A few, like Chief Williams, struggled with severe depression and PTSD, the psychological cost of temporal displacement proving too great to overcome with counseling alone. Hayes remained near Norfolk, near Sarah. He visited her daily, sometimes just sitting with her in comfortable silence, sometimes talking for hours about the past and the present and the uncertain future. They couldn't reclaim the life they'd lost, but they could build something new, however strange and bittersweet. He also began writing, a detailed account of the Scorpius's experience, both as a record for the Navy and as a form of therapy. The act of putting words on paper, of organizing his thoughts and memories, helped him process the magnitude of what had happened. And late at night, when the loneliness became too much, he would sometimes pull up photos of his son Thomas, studying the face of a man he'd never had the chance to know as an adult, mourning a relationship that had been stolen by time itself. The world of 2023 continued to spin, indifferent to the temporal refugees trying to find their place in it. But slowly, painfully, the crew of the USS Scorpius learned to navigate this new reality, carrying within them the memories of a world that no longer existed and the burden of being living anachronisms, ghosts who had somehow found their way back from the past. 6 months after the Scorpius had emerged into 2023, Commander Robert Hayes stood on a beach in Virginia, watching the Atlantic waves roll in under a late September sunset. The ocean, at least, was unchanged. The same eternal rhythm, the same salt spray, the same vast mystery. It was one of the few constants between his time and this one. His phone buzzed. He'd finally mastered the smartphone they'd given him, though he still marveled at its capabilities compared to the brick-sized car phones that had been cutting edge in 1984. It was a text from Dr. Reynolds. Important development. Need you at Norfolk ASAP. Bring Chen and Williams if you can reach them. Hayes felt his pulse quicken. In the months since their debriefing, there had been periodic check-ins and continuing studies, but nothing that would warrant an urgent summons. He immediately contacted Lieutenant Chen, who was taking online courses in advanced navigation systems at Old Dominion University, and Chief Williams, who was living in a small apartment in Virginia Beach and working through his trauma with intensive therapy. 2 hours later, the three of them sat in a secure conference room at Norfolk Naval Station, facing Dr. Reynolds, Dr. Foster from MIT, and a new face, a woman in her 60s with sharp, intelligent eyes and an air of quiet authority. Commander Hayes, Lieutenant Chen, Chief Williams, Dr. Reynolds began. Thank you for coming so quickly. I'd like to introduce Dr. Margaret Ashford. She's with a classified division of DARPA that studies unusual phenomena. Dr. Ashford nodded in greeting. I've been following your case closely since you emerged. The Navy has been gracious enough to share the data from the Scorpius, and I have to say, it's the most compelling evidence of temporal displacement I've ever encountered. Evidence? Hayes said. We're not evidence. We're people whose lives were destroyed. I understand your anger, Commander, Ashford replied calmly, and I'm sorry for what happened to you, but I need you to understand something. What you experienced wasn't random. We've been tracking anomalous events like yours for decades, and there's a pattern. She pulled up a display on the wall screen, showing a map of the world with dozens of red dots scattered across it. These are documented cases of temporal or spatial anomalies, places where the laws of physics seem to bend, where time doesn't flow normally, where objects or people have disappeared and sometimes reappeared. Most are dismissed as hoaxes or hallucinations, but some, like yours, are genuine. Chen leaned forward, her scientific curiosity overcoming her wariness. You're saying this has happened before? Not quite the same scenario, Dr. Foster interjected. Nothing as dramatic as an entire submarine and crew jumping forward 39 years. But there have been smaller incidents. Missing aircraft that reappeared hours later having experienced only minutes. Ships that emerged from fog banks in the wrong year. Even individuals who claim to have slipped through time. The famous cases are usually written off, Ashford continued. The Philadelphia experiment, the Bermuda Triangle disappearances, various UFO encounters. but stripped of the sensationalism, there's a kernel of something real. The Scorpius has given us the most credible, well-documented case we've ever had. Williams spoke up, his voice heavy with skepticism. So what? You figured out that weird stuff happens in the ocean. How does that help us? Can you send us back? No, Ashford said bluntly. As Dr. Foster told you months ago, that's not possible with our current understanding, but we might be able to find answers. Commander Hayes, in your debriefing, you mentioned that Chief Williams detected an artificial pattern in the anomaly's acoustic signature. We've analyzed that recording extensively. She pulled up another image, the waveform that Williams had captured just before the displacement event. This isn't natural. The pattern is too regular, too complex. It's not random noise or geological activity. Someone or something created that anomaly. The implications hung in the air like a thunderclap. Hayes felt a chill run down his spine. You're saying someone deliberately sent us through time? Not necessarily someone, Dr. Foster said carefully. It could be autonomous technology, something left behind by, well, we don't know. Could be a secret government project from the Cold War era that malfunctioned. Could be extraterrestrial in origin. Could be something even stranger. You're talking about aliens, Williams said flatly. You're telling us that aliens zapped us forward in time. I'm saying we don't know what we're dealing with, Ashford replied. But here's the critical point. 3 days ago, NOAA detected the same acoustic signature. The anomaly is back. The room fell silent. Hayes felt his mouth go dry. Where? Approximately 40 miles from where the Scorpius disappeared. It appeared suddenly, lasted for about 6 hours, and then vanished again. During that time, we detected the same low-frequency pattern, the same electromagnetic disturbances. Whatever caused your displacement, it's active again. Chen's mind was already racing ahead. If we could study it directly, with modern equipment, we might be able to understand the mechanism, maybe even predict when and where it will appear next. Exactly, Dr. Foster said. That's why we're here. We're organizing an expedition, a research vessel equipped with every sensor, every analytical tool we can fit on it. We want to find this anomaly, study it, and hopefully understand what the hell it is. And you want us to come with you, Hayes said, understanding now where this was leading. You're the only people who've experienced the phenomenon and survived to tell about it, Ashford explained. Your first-hand knowledge could be invaluable. More than that, if the anomaly is somehow intelligently controlled, it might respond to the Scorpius or her crew. You might be the key to unlocking this mystery. Williams shook his head. With all due respect, I've spent 6 months trying to forget what happened to us. The last thing I want to do is go back out there and risk it happening again. I understand your reluctance, Ashford said. This would be entirely voluntary. No pressure, no obligations. But think about what you could learn. Think about the possibility of understanding why this happened to you. Hayes looked at Chen, then at Williams. He could see the conflict in their faces, the trauma warring with curiosity, fear battling the need for answers. He felt the same turmoil in himself. Part of him wanted nothing more than to walk away, to focus on rebuilding his life with Sarah, on learning to be a grandfather to people who were older than him. But another part, the part that had made him a submarine commander, the part that had always sought to understand the ocean's mysteries, was drawn irresistibly to the chance for answers. How long would the expedition last? Hayes asked. 2 weeks initially. If we find nothing, we pack up and come home. If we find the anomaly, we study it for as long as it's safe to do so. What safety precautions are in place? If this thing can send a nuclear submarine through time, what's to stop it from doing the same to your research vessel? We'll maintain a safe distance during active periods, Dr. Foster explained. The Scorpius was likely much closer to the anomaly's center when you were caught. We'll use remote sensors and drones for close observation. The goal is to study it, not to enter it. Hayes stood and walked to the window, looking out at the naval base, at the ships that were still alien to him after half a year. He thought about Sarah, about the life they were tentatively rebuilding. He thought about his son Tommy, who had spent his career studying the ocean, always hoping his father would return. And he thought about the 128 other crew members of the Scorpius, most of whom were still struggling to find meaning in a world that had left them behind. If we do this, Hayes said slowly, I want the entire crew given the opportunity to participate. Not just us 3. Anyone who wants to be part of this should have the chance. Ashford nodded. Agreed. We can't take everyone. The research vessel has limited capacity, but we can accommodate a dozen or so people. We'll reach out to your crew and gauge interest. I'm in, Chen said suddenly. Whatever happened to us? It was the most significant temporal event in recorded history. As a scientist, as someone who lived through it, I need to understand it. Williams sighed heavily. I knew you were going to say that, Lieutenant. And I guess if you two are going, I can't let you face that thing without someone watching your backs. Count me in, but under protest. Hayes turned back to face the room. Then we do this, but on one condition. If at any point this expedition becomes too dangerous, if the anomaly behaves in ways that threaten the ship or crew, we abort immediately. No heroics, no taking unnecessary risks. We're not trying to recreate what happened to the Scorpius. Absolutely agreed, Ashford said. Commander, I should mention one more thing. The Navy is recommending that you serve as the military advisor for this expedition. You'd have authority to call off operations if you deem them unsafe. Are you willing to take on that role? Hayes considered. It was, in a strange way, a return to command, not of the Scorpius, but of an operation that might finally provide answers to the nightmare they'd lived through. Yes, he said finally. I'll do it. 3 weeks later, the research vessel RV Temporal Horizon, a name that Hayes found either poetic or morbid depending on his mood, departed Norfolk. The ship was a marvel of modern oceanographic research, bristling with equipment that would have been science fiction in 1984. In addition to Hayes, Chen, and Williams, 7 other members of the Scorpius crew had volunteered. Sonar technicians, engineers, and the executive officer, James Pearson, who had struggled with civilian life and jumped at the chance to return to something resembling naval duty. The civilian scientific team was led by Dr. Foster and included specialists in quantum physics, acoustic analysis, gravitational anomalies, and various other fields that Hayes only partially understood. Dr. Ashford had also brought a team of engineers equipped with experimental detection equipment, some of which she admitted was based on theoretical principles that may not actually work. The atmosphere on the temporal horizon was tense, but purposeful. The former Scorpius crew members found comfort in being together again, united by their shared experience. They fell easily into old patterns of camaraderie, the gallows humor and mutual support that had sustained them through decades of submarine duty. On the 5th day at sea, they reached the search area, a patch of ocean that looked no different from any other but carried, for the Scorpius veterans, the weight of traumatic memory. Hayes stood on the bridge, watching the gray waters, remembering how they'd looked through the periscope that March day in 1984. Deploying Sensor Array Alpha, announced one of Dr. Foster's technicians. A complex web of hydrophones, magnetometers, and other instruments was lowered into the water, creating a 3-dimensional detection grid. Similar arrays were deployed at intervals, creating a network that covered several square miles. For 3 days they searched, finding nothing but normal ocean conditions. Hayes began to wonder if the anomaly had been a one-time event, if they'd come all this way for nothing. But on the morning of the 4th day, Williams, who had been monitoring the acoustic sensors almost obsessively, suddenly stood bolt upright from his station. I've got it, he said, his voice tight. I've got the pattern. Bearing 270, range approximately 12 miles. It's faint, but it's definitely the same signature. The ship came alive with activity. Dr. Foster coordinated the sensor teams while Ashford's engineers activated their experimental detection equipment. Hayes moved to the bridge to coordinate with Captain Sarah Okonkwo, the Nigerian-American oceanographer who commanded the temporal horizon. Captain, recommend we approach to within 5 miles and hold position, Hayes said. Close enough to study, far enough to maintain a safety margin. Agreed, Okonkwo replied. She was a no-nonsense professional who had impressed Hayes with her competence and her willingness to defer to his expertise on matters related to the anomaly. Helm, come to heading 270 ahead 1/3. Let's take this nice and slow. As they approached, the instruments began registering increasingly strange readings. The local magnetic field was fluctuating in ways that made no sense according to conventional physics. The water temperature showed inexplicable variations, and the acoustic signature grew stronger, resolving into the complex pattern that Williams had first detected 39 years ago. Range 5 miles and holding, the helmsman announced. Dr. Foster looked up from her instruments, her face pale. My God, the readings we're getting. Space-time curvature is off the charts. There's a gravitational gradient that shouldn't be possible without a massive object, but there's nothing there. It's as if space itself is warping. Deploying autonomous underwater vehicles. announced one of the engineers. 3 sleek drones were launched from the stern, each equipped with high-definition cameras and advanced sensors. They swam toward the anomaly, their progress tracked on multiple screens. Hayes watched the video feeds as the drones approached the area of distortion. At first, everything looked normal, just dark ocean water. But then, gradually, the image began to shimmer and distort, as if they were viewing it through heat waves. The drone's telemetry showed massive fluctuations in their internal clocks, time dilating and contracting as they neared the anomaly's center. Drone 1 is experiencing instrument malfunction, a technician reported. Clock synchronization is failing, multiple system errors. Pull it back, Hayes ordered. Don't risk losing it. But before the recall command could be executed, something happened. The shimmer intensified, and suddenly the video feed showed something impossible. The ocean seemed to split open, revealing not more water, but what looked like a tunnel of light, swirling with colors that hurt to look at. The drone was caught in the phenomenon, spinning wildly, and then, just as suddenly, it was gone. The tunnel closed, the shimmer faded, and there was only normal ocean again. Drone 1 telemetry lost, the technician said unnecessarily. It's just gone. Chen was frantically analyzing the data. Did you see that? The temporal reading spiked right before the drone disappeared. It's not just a spatial anomaly, it's a temporal one. That tunnel, if we can call it that, it's a passage through time. Or to somewhere else entirely, Dr. Foster added, her voice filled with a mixture of fear and excitement. The math I'm seeing here suggests this could be a traversable wormhole, but one that's primarily oriented along the temporal axis rather than spatial. The Scorpius didn't just move through time. You traveled through a tunnel that connects different temporal coordinates. Williams spoke up from his station. The acoustic pattern is changing. It's getting more complex, like it's responding to the drones. Hayes felt a chill. Responding? As in, intelligently? I don't know. But the pattern before was regular, almost mechanical. Now it's varying, adapting. It's like it's trying to communicate. Dr. Ashford moved quickly to Williams' station, studying the acoustic display. Chief Williams is right. This is a directed signal. Someone or something is using this anomaly to transmit information. Can we decode it? Hayes asked. We can try. Ashford's team immediately began work, running the signal through various analytical algorithms, trying to find patterns or structures that might indicate language or data encoding. For hours, they worked, the temporal horizon holding position 5 miles from the anomaly while scientists and engineers tried to decipher the message from across time. Hayes found himself pacing the bridge, unable to shake the feeling that they were on the verge of something momentous. Finally, as the sun began to set, Dr. Ashford approached Hayes with a printout. Her hand was shaking. Commander, we've managed to decode part of the signal. It's mathematical, universal constants, geometric principles, things that any advanced civilization would understand. But there's also a component that seems to be a warning. A warning about what? We're not entirely sure. The message is fragmentary and our translation is rough, but the gist seems to be, do not enter. Temporal displacement occurs. Return mechanism unavailable. Danger. Hayes stared at the printout. Someone left a warning buoy. They created this anomaly, or found it, and they left a warning for anyone who might encounter it. That's our interpretation, Ashford confirmed. But here's the truly unsettling part. The message includes a timestamp. Based on our analysis, it was encoded approximately 200 years ago. The implications were staggering. Someone or something had been dealing with temporal anomalies in the early 19th century, had enough understanding of the phenomenon to leave a warning, and had technology sophisticated enough to encode that warning in a way that would last for 2 centuries. Who could have done this? Chen asked. No civilization on Earth had that capability in the 1820s. Unless they were from the future, Williams suggested. Time travelers who went back and tried to prevent accidents like ours. Doctor, Foster shook her head. If they were from our future, the warning would be in modern English, modern mathematical notation. This uses different conventions, different encoding structures. Whatever left this warning, it wasn't human, at least not human from any era we know. The evening was spent in intense debate among the scientists, trying to understand the implications of their discovery. Hayes excused himself and went to the ship's fantail, needing air and space to think. He found Pearson already there, staring out at the dark ocean. Hell of a thing, isn't it, Skipper? Pearson said, using the informal term that Hayes's crew had always used. We thought we just stumbled into some kind of freak accident. Turns out we're caught up in something much bigger. A mystery that spans centuries, Hayes agreed. And we're no closer to understanding why it happened to us specifically. Why the Scorpius? Why that day in March 1984? Maybe we were just unlucky. Wrong place, wrong time. Or maybe there was a reason. Maybe whatever created this anomaly had a purpose for sending us forward. Pearson turned to look at Hayes. That's a disturbing thought. You're suggesting we were chosen? I'm suggesting we should consider every possibility. Hayes paused, then voiced something that had been nagging at him. XO, when we first encountered the anomaly, you remember I ordered all stop. But before I gave that order I had a feeling, just for a second, like we should turn around, get out of there. And then it passed and I convinced myself it was just caution. But what if it wasn't? What if something was trying to warn us? Pearson considered this. You think the anomaly itself was trying to communicate with you? I think something was. The question is whether it was a warning to stay away or something else. Their conversation was interrupted by an announcement over the ship's PA system. All senior staff to the main lab immediately. They found the lab in controlled chaos. Dr. Foster was at the center of it, her face flushed with excitement. We've decoded more of the message, she announced as Hayes and Pearson entered. And you need to see this. She pulled up a complex display of mathematical formulas and diagrams. The message includes what appears to be a map, not of physical space, but of temporal space. It shows multiple anomalies, multiple locations where these temporal rifts appear. And here's the crucial part. They're not random. They form a network. A network of what? Hayes asked. We don't know, but the Scorpius's displacement wasn't an isolated incident. Based on this map, there are dozens of these anomalies scattered across the globe, all connected somehow, all part of a larger structure. It's like a transportation system, but one that moves through time instead of space. Chen was studying the map intensely. If this is accurate, then there should be another anomaly relatively close to us. Here, she pointed to a location on the display, approximately 60 miles northeast of our current position. How do we know this map is accurate? Williams asked skeptically. It could be a hoax or a trap. Only one way to find out, Ashford said. We go look. Hayes considered the risks. They were already far from shore, already engaged in a dangerous study of a phenomenon they barely understood. Chasing after a second anomaly based on a decoded message from an unknown source seemed like compounding the danger. But the potential payoff, understanding the network, perhaps finding a way to predict or control these temporal rifts, was too significant to ignore. All right, he said finally. We investigate the second site, but we do it carefully, and we maintain constant communication with Norfolk. If anything goes wrong, I want them to know exactly what we were doing and what we found. The temporal horizon arrived at the coordinates indicated by the decoded map 2 days later. The area was unremarkable. Deep ocean, no unusual surface features, nothing to suggest anything extraordinary. But as they deployed their sensor arrays, the instruments immediately began registering the same anomalous readings: magnetic fluctuations, acoustic patterns, space-time distortions. It's here, Chen confirmed. The map was accurate. There's another anomaly at this location. But this one was different. While the first site had shown intermittent activity, this anomaly was stable, constantly active. The acoustic signature was stronger, more coherent. And when they deployed drones to investigate, the video feeds showed something that took Hayes's breath away. The temporal rift at this location was visible, not just as a shimmer or distortion, but as an actual structure. It appeared as a sphere of swirling energy, hovering in the water approximately 200 feet below the surface, perhaps 50 feet in diameter. The colors shifted and flowed, blues and purples and colors that didn't seem to have names, all swirling in complex patterns. It's beautiful, Chen whispered, staring at the display. It's terrifying, Williams countered. That's the thing that stole 39 years of our lives. Dr. Foster was recording everything, her instruments capturing data at rates that would take months to analyze. The energy readings are off the scale. Whatever is generating this is using power levels that dwarf anything we can produce. And look at this. She highlighted a portion of the display. The temporal gradient is gentler here than at the first site. This might be a more stable access point. Access to what? Pearson asked. To the network. To wherever or whenever these anomalies lead. Hayes felt a knot forming in his stomach. He knew where this was leading, could see it in the excited expressions of the scientists. in the way Dr. Ashford was already conferring with her engineering team. "No," he said firmly. "Absolutely not. We're not sending anyone through that thing." "Commander, think about what we could learn," Dr. Foster argued. "This is the discovery of the millennium, perhaps of all human history. A pathway through time, a network that spans centuries or millennia. We have to investigate further." "We have to stay safe," Hayes countered. "That thing sent my submarine and 129 people 39 years into the future. We still don't know why, we don't know how, and we sure as hell don't know how to reverse it. I'm not letting anyone else suffer what my crew suffered." "What if there's a way to control it?" Ashford interjected. "What if understanding this network could give us the ability to choose where and when we go? Think about the implications. Scientific research, preventing historical disasters, curing diseases by bringing back future medical knowledge, or destroying the timeline," Hayes shot back. "Or getting trapped in the past or future with no way home, or dying in some horrific way we can't even imagine. The risks are incalculable." The argument continued for hours, with the scientists pushing for continued investigation, and Hayes firmly maintaining that they'd learned enough, that it was time to return to Norfolk and let others decide how to proceed. But as the debate raged, the anomaly itself rendered the argument moot. The acoustic pattern suddenly shifted, becoming more intense, more urgent. Williams called out, "The signal is changing again. It's the same warning as before, but stronger. It's like it's screaming at us to get away." And then the anomaly began to expand. What had been a 50-foot sphere suddenly doubled in size, then doubled again. The temporal rift was growing, and the temporal horizon was caught in its influence. Hayes felt that same sensation from the Scorpius, the vertigo, the feeling of reality bending around him. "Full reverse! Get us out of here!" Captain Okonkwo shouted, but the ship's engines seemed sluggish, as if they were pushing through molasses. The sphere continued to expand, now several hundred feet in diameter and still growing. On the video feeds, Hayes could see inside the rift now, could see swirling tunnels of light that seemed to extend in impossible directions, pathways that led to other times, other places, and then he saw them, shapes moving inside the rift. Not random distortions, but defined forms. They were large, submarine-sized or larger, and they seemed to be traveling through the temporal pathways with purpose. In the brief glimpses before the view became too distorted, Hayes thought he saw something like a craft, sleek and organic, unlike anything human technology had produced. "There's something in there," he shouted. "Something is using these rifts. This isn't just a natural phenomenon, it's infrastructure. Someone built this." The engines finally caught, and the temporal horizon began to pull away from the expanding anomaly. The sphere reached what must have been its maximum size, perhaps a quarter-mile in diameter, and then, suddenly, it collapsed. Not gradually, but instantaneously, shrinking back to a point and disappearing entirely. The ocean was calm again, normal, as if nothing had happened. The ship's bridge was silent except for heavy breathing and the sound of someone being sick in a corner. Hayes felt his legs trembling, adrenaline flooding his system. That had been too close. Another few seconds and they might have been pulled in, might have been sent to wherever those pathways led. "Did anyone else see that?" Chen asked, her voice shaking. "Those shapes inside the rift?" "I saw them," Dr. Foster confirmed. "The cameras caught them too. We'll need to analyze the footage, but you're right, Commander Hayes. This is infrastructure. These temporal rifts are part of a network being actively used by someone. Something." Dr. Ashford was pale but determined. "We need to report this immediately. We're not just dealing with a natural phenomenon or abandoned technology. There are active users of this network, and they may not want us investigating it." The temporal horizon immediately set course for Norfolk, transmitting encrypted reports of their findings as they traveled. The scientific community would be in an uproar when the data was released. The implications were staggering. Humanity was not alone, and moreover there were others who had mastered temporal travel, who moved through time as easily as humans crossed oceans. On the journey back, Hayes spent long hours reviewing the footage of the shapes inside the rift, trying to understand what they'd seen. The forms were too brief, too distorted to be certain, but they suggested intelligence, purpose, technology, far beyond human capabilities. He thought about the warning message encoded 200 years ago. Had it been left by these same entities? Were they trying to protect humans from accidentally falling into their network, or were they trying to keep humans from discovering the network's existence? One evening, as they neared Norfolk, Sarah Chen found Hayes standing on the deck, staring at the stars. Trying to figure out where they come from, she asked, joining him. Or when, Hayes replied. If they can travel through time as well as space, they could be from Earth's far future, or from some point in the distant past. They might not be aliens in the traditional sense. They might be human descendants so advanced we don't recognize them as the same species. That's a disturbing thought, Chen said, that our own descendants might have access to this network but chose not to prevent our displacement, chose not to help us. Maybe they couldn't. Maybe the rules of time travel prevent them from changing events, or maybe, Hayes trailed off, not wanting to voice the thought. Maybe they needed it to happen, Chen finished for him. Maybe our displacement served some purpose we don't understand. They stood in silence for a moment, contemplating the vast conspiracy of time and fate that might have orchestrated their experience. Finally, Hayes spoke again. When we get back, there's going to be pressure to continue investigating, to mount larger expeditions, maybe even to attempt controlled passage through the rifts. What do you think we should do? Chen considered carefully before answering. I think we should proceed, but with extreme caution. We can't undiscover what we've found. The knowledge is out there now. If we don't study it responsibly, someone else will study it irresponsibly. We need to be the ones guiding this research, setting the safety protocols, determining the ethical boundaries. And if we discover something we're not ready for, something that changes everything, then we adapt. It's what humans do. We encountered the impossible. We traveled through time, and we survived. We're adapting to a new era, building new lives. We can handle whatever comes next. Hayes hoped she was right. The temporal horizon docked at Norfolk to a scene of controlled chaos. Military officials, government representatives, and scientific advisors descended on the ship, eager to hear first-hand accounts and review the data. The footage of the shapes inside the rift was immediately classified at the highest levels, though Hayes suspected it wouldn't remain secret for long. In the weeks that followed, Hayes was pulled into countless meetings and briefings. The government was torn between the desire to study the temporal network further and the fear of attracting unwanted attention from whoever or whatever was using it. A special task force was created, combining military, scientific, and intelligence resources, charged with monitoring the known anomaly sites and trying to decode more of the messages in the acoustic patterns. Hayes was offered a position with the task force as the senior military advisor, a role that would essentially make him the Navy's point person on all matters related to temporal phenomena. It was a strange sort of homecoming, returning to active service, but in a capacity that would have seemed like science fiction a year ago. He discussed it with Sarah during one of his visits. She was frailer now. The stress of their reunion, combined with her advanced age, had taken a toll, but her mind was as sharp as ever. You're going to take it, she said. It wasn't a question. I think I have to, Hayes replied. I'm uniquely qualified, and this is too important to leave to people who don't understand what it means to be caught in one of those rifts. I know, and I support you even though it means less time together. We've already lost so much time, Robert, but I understand that some things are bigger than us. Hayes took her hand gently. When this is done, when we understand what we're dealing with and have proper protocols in place, I'm retiring for real. We'll have whatever time we have left without interruption. Sarah smiled sadly. I'm 83 years old, Robert. We both know I don't have much time left, but I'm grateful for what we've had, strange as it is. How many widows get their husbands back after 40 years? Sarah, no, let me finish. You came back to me looking exactly as I remembered, and it's been both wonderful and heartbreaking. But I want you to promise me something. When I'm gone, I want you to live. Really live. You're still young. You have decades ahead of you. Don't spend them mourning the past or drowning in this temporal mystery. Find joy. Find purpose. Find love again if you can. Hayes felt tears streaming down his face. I don't want to think about losing you. I know. But it's coming. Sooner rather than later. And I need to know that you'll be all right. They sat together for a long time, holding hands, not speaking, just being present with each other in a way that transcended the temporal distance between them. Sarah passed away 3 months later, peacefully in her sleep. Hayes was with her at the end, along with Jennifer and her children, his grandchildren, who had slowly come to accept him as family, despite the strangeness of the situation. The funeral was attended by hundreds. Sarah had touched many lives in her decades of advocacy work, and Hayes was struck by the realization that his wife had lived a full, meaningful life in his absence. She had not been frozen in time as he had. She had grown, changed, made a difference in the world. The grief he felt was mixed with pride and a strange sort of envy. Work became his anchor in the months that followed. The task force made progress in understanding the temporal network, identifying 17 stable anomaly sites across the globe and cataloging hundreds of instances of temporal activity. They learned that the network seemed to have different types of nodes, some like the one that had caught the Scorpius, which were unstable and dangerous, and others that were more controlled, possibly designed as actual entry points. The acoustic warnings were gradually decoded, revealing a complex message system that had been maintained for centuries, perhaps millennia. The messages were multilingual in a sense, encoding information in mathematical and physical principles that any advanced civilization would understand. They warned of the dangers of uncontrolled temporal displacement, provided rough maps of the network, and contained fragments of something that looked like operating instructions. And always, there were the shapes in the rifts. More footage was captured over time from different sites using increasingly sophisticated equipment. The forms varied. Some appeared mechanical, others almost organic. Still others defied classification entirely. They moved through the temporal pathways with apparent purpose, but their goals remained unknown. Attempts to communicate had so far been unsuccessful. 2 years after the Scorpius had emerged into 2023, Hayes stood on the deck of a new research vessel, the RV Kronos, observing an experiment that would have been unthinkable when they'd first discovered the network. Under carefully controlled conditions, with multiple failsafes in place, they were sending an unmanned probe through one of the stable rifts. The probe was heavily instrumented, designed to record everything it encountered and transmit data back through a quantum-entangled communication system that theoretically wouldn't be affected by temporal displacement. It was also equipped with a homing beacon tuned to the rift's frequency, which they hoped would allow it to find its way back. "Ready to deploy," announced Dr. Chen. She'd completed her doctorate in temporal physics, becoming one of the world's leading experts on the phenomenon that had displaced her. "Probe is at the interface. All systems green." Hayes watched the video feed as the probe approached the shimmering surface of the rift. For a moment it seemed to hang there, balanced between now and elsewhere. Then it passed through, and the feed went blank. Seconds ticked by. The communications team monitored the quantum link, waiting for any signal. Minutes passed. Hayes felt tension knotting his shoulders. Had they lost it? Had something gone wrong? And then, suddenly, data began streaming in. Images, sensor readings, timestamps. The probe was transmitting from inside the rift, from somewhere, someone else. The images were chaotic at first, swirling lights and distorted geometries that made no sense to human perception. But as the computers processed and stabilized them, patterns emerged. The probe was traveling through a tunnel, walls of energy flowing past it, carrying it forward, or backward or sideways through time. It was impossible to tell. And then the tunnel opened up, and they saw where it led. A city, not floating in space or time, but somehow existing within the temporal network itself. Massive structures of crystalline material, pulsing with light, connected by bridges of energy, and moving through it, the shapes they'd glimpsed before, craft or beings impossible to say which, going about incomprehensible business. "My God," someone whispered. "It's a civilization. They live in the network." The probe recorded for 17 minutes before its batteries failed and transmission ceased. In that time, it captured images and data that would revolutionize humanity's understanding of reality, time, and the universe. The temporal network wasn't just a transportation system. It was inhabited. It was, in some sense, a separate realm of existence, parallel to normal space-time, but operating on different principles. The implications were staggering. These beings, whoever or whatever they were, had built a civilization outside of time. They could access any point in history, any moment in the future. They were, in a very real sense, masters of time itself, and the Scorpius had accidentally stumbled into their domain. Over the following years, humanity slowly came to terms with this new reality. The existence of the temporal network was officially acknowledged, though the specifics remained highly classified. International agreements were reached regarding research and exploration of the rifts, with strict protocols designed to minimize the risk of uncontrolled displacement or of disturbing the network's mysterious inhabitants. The crew of the Scorpius became something like ambassadors, speaking to governments and scientific bodies about their experience, advocating for careful, ethical research. Some struggled with their roles as temporal refugees, never fully adjusting to life in the 21st century. Others thrived, finding new purpose and helping humanity navigate this strange, new frontier. Hayes continued his work with the task force for another 5 years before finally retiring at the age of 57, still young by the standards of 2028, but worn down by the weight of responsibility and loss. He moved to a quiet coastal town in Oregon, near his daughter Jennifer, and tried to find some semblance of peace. He never remarried, though he formed friendships and had relationships. Nothing felt quite right, partly because he was still mourning Sarah, partly because everyone his own physical age was decades younger than him in life experience, and everyone his own chronological age was elderly, and from a generation he'd skipped entirely. He was a man out of time in more ways than one. On the 45th anniversary of the Scorpius's disappearance, or the 6th anniversary of her reappearance, depending on how you counted, Hayes stood on a beach watching the sunset, much as he had done that day when Dr. Reynolds had summoned him back to Norfolk. He was 62 years old biologically, 101 chronologically, and he felt every year of both ages. His phone buzzed with a message from Dr. Chen. The task force had made another breakthrough. They'd successfully decoded what appeared to be an invitation, a message from the network's inhabitants offering to make contact, to explain themselves and their purpose. Humanity stood on the threshold of an encounter that would change everything. The beings who lived outside of time wanted to meet the species that had accidentally discovered their realm. The governments were debating how to respond, what to say, whether to accept. And Hayes thought about his crew, scattered across the world, carrying within them the memory of that March day in 1984 when everything had changed. They had been the first humans to truly touch the network, to feel the flow of time itself carrying them forward. They had paid the price in lost years, lost loves, lost lives, but they had also opened a door that could never be closed. Humanity had learned that time was not the rigid, unchanging dimension they'd always believed. It was fluid, navigable, full of mysteries and wonders and dangers beyond imagining. The sun touched the horizon, painting the ocean in shades of gold and crimson. Hayes closed his eyes and felt the wind on his face, the same wind that had blown across this beach for millennia, constant even as everything else changed. Somewhere out there in the dark waters, the rifts continued to pulse with their impossible energies. Somewhere outside of time, a civilization waited to meet humanity. And somewhere in the flow of moments, the USS Scorpius still sailed, forever frozen in that instant between 1984 and 2023, a ghost ship suspended in the amber of temporal displacement. Hayes opened his eyes and watched the sun disappear beyond the curve of the earth. Tomorrow he would contact Chen and tell her he wanted to be part of the delegation when humanity finally met the masters of time. He had started this journey accidentally, had been the unwilling pioneer of humanity's temporal exploration. It was only fitting that he be there when the next chapter began. The stars began to appear in the darkening sky, and Hayes wondered which of them might be visible from that city outside of time, that impossible realm where past and future met in an eternal present. Soon, he might find out. The ocean rolled endlessly before him, keeping its secrets, holding its mysteries. But one by one those secrets were being revealed. Time itself was not an enemy to be feared, but a frontier to be explored, carefully, respectfully, but inevitably. The USS Scorpius had been lost in 1984 and found in 2023, but in the larger story that was unfolding, that was only the beginning. The true voyage through time was just starting.